So I'll get started. So good afternoon from the Textile Institute in Manchester, UK, and welcome to today's session and day one of Tea with a TI, our first webinar series for 2020. Thank you all for joining us today. For those who I've not had the pleasure to meet, I'm Stephanie Dick, the CEO of the Textile Institute. I hope that you're all safe and well during these difficult and challenging times. It's certainly been an unusual year for us all. Over the last few months, the TI team, along with a number of its sections and special interest groups, have been looking at those topics and inquiries we've received, both COVID and non-COVID related, and have put together this webinar series that we can share this information with you all. This year, the team at the Institute has received an unprecedented number of inquiries from our members, industry, academia, and organisations looking to network for industry partners and academic collaborations. And this is how we arrived at the Tea with the TI webinar series. So a few housekeeping notes. Just to remind everyone, we'll be recording the session today, and a version of the webinar will be emailed out at the end of this week to you all. The timing today for the session will be approximately an hour. Today, after both presentations, you're invited to ask questions. For those familiar with the Zoom setup, please feel free to ask your questions in the question and answer feature on Zoom. And for those that are not familiar with the Zoom setup, you'll find this at the bottom of your screen. The chair of the session will monitor the Q&A throughout the presentations. And if we do not get a chance to have all your questions answered, we'll forward these to the presenters who'll be happy to respond and engage following the webinar. So it's now my pleasure to welcome and introduce Vanessa Wakefield, who I've known now for many years. And I'm sure that many of you recognise her name as an Institute member. Vanessa has 30 years experience in international communications and business management, and she is the Managing Director of Pebble International, working for various organisations, including Recyclatex, where she is the General Secretary. Representing Recyclatex, she's been part of the steering group of the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan, SCAP 2020, and chair of its Reuse and Recycling Working Group. Vanessa is also editor of Textiles, the international membership magazine of the Institute, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. She's also chair of the Institute's Sustainability Special Interest Group and was chair of the Textile Terms and Definitions TT&D Committee and convener of the TT&D Sustainability Committee, helping to move the publication online now a number of years ago. She's also a member of the editorial board of Sustainable Nonwovens. Over the years, Vanessa has been a project manager for the European Outdoor Group and was their sustainability manager, working with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, acting as vice chair of the Federation Sporting Goods Industry Environmental Committee, and was chair of the Clean Solutions Task Working Group, working directly with the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals Group on the P05 Durable Water Repellency Project. I will now switch my camera and microphone off and hand over to you, Vanessa. I hope that you all enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. As Steph mentioned, I'm chair of the Sustainability Special Interest Group for Textile Institute. We set up the Special Interest Group towards the end of 2008, and we've been working on various different things over the years, including student competitions. We've arranged events similar to this, but mainly in person previously. We've also looked at the different industry sectors and considered ways in which the SIG could improve necessary and valuable insights for them. It was something that we felt was quite important for us as a group. Our aim has always been, as it is for most of the Institute's SIGs, is to link education and industry and to disseminate information and provide a forum for debate. We agreed a definition of sustainability quite early on in the group, and we revised it, or we reviewed it, I should say, a couple of years ago and decided that actually it was still relevant. And what we agreed was a definition of sustainability based on the Brundtland report from 1987. So our definition is that sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without negative impact on the environment and present and future generations. And I think some of what we're going to be talking about today around fibre to fibre recycling and how we treat our waste from the industry is going to be quite relevant to that, and ensuring that what we have now is still available to those future generations. We're currently, as a SIG, we're in the process of looking at resources and what we can offer what is now a much more online community. And part of what we're doing is working with the Institute directly as they develop their new website to put in place an area of the website for people to use as a resource for sustainability. So that will include links to other websites, hopefully links to abstracts from past TI World conferences, and we'll look at other sources of information as well, but that's something that's ongoing and hopefully will be available to everybody in the coming months. So to start today's session, I'd like to introduce Ross Barry. Ross is the chair of the Recyclatex group, and he is also the former president of the Textile Recycling Association here in the UK. Ross is also managing director of L&B Textiles, which is a London-based grader and recycler working in partnership with local authorities, charities and brands to provide a reuse recycling closed-loop solution to pre- and post-consumer clothing, textiles and shoes. It's a third generation family business, so combined with the wealth of experience that Ross has had whilst working within the Recyclatex group, which is made up of 9 individual companies that work together to provide a nationwide service, Ross should be able to tackle most of the questions around waste in textiles, past, present and future, hopefully. So I'll hand over to Ross now, and Ross will run through his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. This is where we see if I have learned how to share a presentation. Can you see this? Can you hear me? No.
We can hear you, but we can't see it yet, no.
Oh, let's give it a second. Did everything you told me? Let's try again. Can you now see it?
We can, yeah.
I was going to say, this is going to be a really quick presentation if you can't. So there you go. Textiles in a circular economy, beyond reuse. So there you go. We've got a lovely image there of some slashed jeans, because everyone loves them. So yes, the UK has a very long history of textile recycling and collection, and in fact one of the highest participation rates in Europe and the world, both in terms of donation and rewear. This is mainly due to the charity sector in the UK being very prevalent, and it's just something that the UK has always done and continues to do so. As you can see, we've got a little horse and cart, the old rag and bone man, which is what everyone thinks of when you mention you're a textile recycler. You get called steptoe at school, but there you go. But nothing's really changed in this industry for about 75 years or so. The horse and cart is now a lorry. Most of the collections are done either by merchants such as myself or the charity sector, but basically it will come to a place, often a large institute, factory, where all the sorting and grading is still manually done by hand. Previously, most of this was actually recycled up until the 80s, when you noticed a big reuse market open up in sub-Saharan Africa. So for the next 10 years, everybody was after lightweight summer clothing until the 1990s arrived, and then the former USSR opened its doors for trade, and everyone there decided they wanted Western clothing and not the brown polyester they'd become used to. So that really kicked the re-wear market off again, because we now had another much bigger market that also wanted winter clothing. Throughout this period, you found reuse grew heavily, recycling started taking a bit of a back step, and it became highly competitive, with often reuse subsidising the collection of recycling. So what you now find is, if you didn't have the reuse market, the actual numbers involved in the cost of collecting clothing wouldn't actually pay to warrant doing the recycling. Obviously, a lot of people are looking into this, and there's a lot of investment and innovation going on, and whether actually recycling can then sort of pay for itself as such. So that's something we'll come on to in a bit. Let's just get our head around the numbers a bit, which I find incredibly, well, I should be used to it, but I still can't quite get my head around it. So in the UK, as you can see, we purchased 26.7 kilos of clothing each. Now, none of us really know what a kilo of clothing looks like, so we know what a bag of sugar looks like. To give you an idea, here is about 5,000 tonnes of what looks to be jumpers. So that's probably about 200,000 garments. So to give you an idea, that shot there would probably fill up a large lorry, and that represents about 750 UK households' consumptions a year. The scary fact is that volume of clothing gets burnt or landfilled every 2 seconds. So that just gives you an idea of just how much clothing we're consuming. As I said, in the UK, we're very good at donation for reuse and rewear, but we're also very good at consuming, with 26.7 kilos of clothing each. When you look at that compared to somewhere like Germany, you know, they're very good. They only consume 16.7 kilos. And in Sweden, they're very minimalist with it. And I don't know if it's because they're naturists, but they only consume 12 kilos of clothing. But don't worry, Australia is just a little bit above us, and America tops the charts at a massive 37 kilos. I'm not sure if that's a stereotype that they're a lot bigger than us, or they just buy a lot more. But it's quite phenomenal. So that basically means in the UK, every single household buys 100 garments a year, which is 2 per week. I think that's quite surprising. What happens to this clothing? As I said, most of it is reused. Previously, I think it was quite easy to say, you know, Africa buys clothing and they use it, and once it's used in Africa, it really isn't much use left. But what we're tending to find now is that, hang on, I'm gonna flick forward, sorry, I've jumped ahead of myself. But you're even finding, you know, our overconsumption is also becoming overconsumption in developing countries in West Africa, such as Ghana. What you're finding, where there is, you know, a lot of pressure on making everything efficient and being able to sort and grade, people are just sorting and grading at a very, for want of a better word, sort of low cost, and doing it very quickly with a view that the host country can then sort and grade it. The problem we're finding is that, you know, there's not the infrastructure in these developing markets to deal with the volume of clothing that they're receiving. If it's bought and it's not a good enough quality, and therefore it's not sold on a market stall, what happens to it? It just ends up in a big open landfill. There could be an argument that it should be re-exported for recycling to India or Pakistan, where they do have the infrastructure, but you're finding the economics of it doesn't work out to re-export. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be the investment in these countries to set up the recycling. So that's something I think everyone's now becoming a lot more conscious of, and it's something that's sort of reared its head, especially over the last couple of years. It's not to say all is lost. If we flick forward, this is a lovely image of Prato in Italy, which this area of Tuscany has been the centre of wool, I think, since the 12th century. So, you know, these guys are incredibly good at recycling. About 12 million garments are produced in Prato a year, and a very high percentage of this is actually from reclaimed wool. So it's mechanically taken back to fibre state and then respun. Traditionally, I'll say traditionally, over the last 20 years, this has sort of gone on behind closed doors. I've taken this picture from a really interesting article in the Sunday Times, probably about a month or so back, basically saying how this, you know, economy was there. It's been there for hundreds of years, but people wasn't interested in buying recycled goods. It was always seen as a lower quality, and now they're having a little bit of a resurgence because the world's woken up to, we should be recycling, and mechanical recycling is, one step towards a closed loop recycling system. So we also had the same system actually in the UK up in Batley, where shoddy was actually invented. There's still a few mills going, and there's quite a few actually reopening. So there is signs that this industry is coming back, and it hasn't just been exported. This is a lovely diagram. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know where it came from, but it's trying to try and make sense of what actually happens in the current model. And as you can see, it's very complicated. There's a lot of mixed messages from various parties, which makes it very hard to get clear communication to the public. Charity shops want high quality clothing that they can sell in store. So people tend to assume that the charity shop will only accept high quality clothing. What often gets left out is that quite often the clothing simply isn't sold in store because they get more donations than they actually can handle. Then that'll go on to a textile merchant or be resold on. But then it leaves people with a bit of confusion. If they've sent their high quality stuff to the charity shop, what do they do with the recycling stuff? Is the Oxfam, Salvation Army, or whoever it is, Textile Bank in the recycling centre at their local supermarket there just for recycling? Is it reused? Does it accept shoes? People start having to make decisions, and as soon as you get the public making decisions, they tend to go to the lowest common denominator of what's actually easiest, and that quite often means it just goes into the recycling at home or into the black bag waste at home, which is why so much of it ends up in landfill. I think in the UK, I think I'm right in saying, Vanessa will probably pick me up on this later, but about 50% of what is actually bought actually gets recycled and reused, and about 50% ends up in landfill. So there's still loads of work to do in trying to tackle this, get more and more people just giving their clothing to the right home rather than just being lazy and popping it in the bin. But there's also a lot of interest, and I think everyone knows about Patagonia in the US with their Common Threads initiative, originally launched about 14 years ago, and we're beginning to see a lot more new business models coming through. So here we've got Mud Jeans, which has got a leasing system whereby you can lease a pair of jeans for a year, and after a year you can send them back and they'll give you a new pair of jeans. And in fact, you can lease up to 3 pairs of jeans at any one time. And this just has a £30 membership fee, or €30 I think it is, and then a £7.50 per month leasing cost. So it's trying to, I think, move people away from thinking of their clothes as a one-off purchase, probably a little more similar to how you'd look at buying a car. And I think that's how people are moving towards their view on clothing. It's something, if you buy a good quality clothing, it then has a longer value, and when you come to no longer want it yourself, it has got a residual value. So this is something I think that Eileen Fisher's looking at, which is an interesting business model. They have a similar scheme to encourage consumers to return items after they're finished with them. So they will then resell it, repair it, upcycle it, so it can be worn again and repurposed. So just keeping it into reused as much as can, and they're looking after that system. They've also doing a lot of artworks and transforming things into pillows and what have you. Paramo in the UK, very similar business model to Patagonia, with the idea that the clothing, you buy it and you keep it for life. So it comes with a lifetime guarantee. They contain no parts that degrade quickly, membranes or elastine, seam tapes or PU coatings that can fail quickly, and no toxic PFC chemicals. So, these guys are really pushing the barriers of environmentally constructed garments. Hang on, I'm flicking ahead. Sorry. Hang on. How do I go back? Sorry, everyone. There you go, back to RAP. So RAP's produced a report on fibre-to-fibre recycling. The report looks into detailed financial viability of recycling here in the UK, and its findings are that yes, it is viable, but to make it work, we need the whole supply chain in place. And that throws into question whether a recycling plant is viable here in the UK. We do need it, as we see more and more countries closing the door to accepting our waste. And here we get to the important part. Is it really waste, or should we actually be looking at it as a resource? And what are the best opportunities for closing the loop for the holy grail of polycottons? Just recently, here we go. I think this next company were in the press recently. It's the Hong Kong Research Institute for Textiles and Apparel project, which has made very, very rapid progress with different types of recycling at different stages of development, with the funding from the Hong Kong government as well as the H&M Foundation. Upcycling post-consumer textiles is not quite on an industrial scale, but they can process 3 tons of textile waste per day. This is mechanical recycling and is proprietary to Novatex. And it's for 100% polyester. The hydrothermal treatment is at the pre-industrial scale stage, which can process up to 100 kilos of textile waste per day. This part of the project is funded by H&M, as I said. Its major advantage is the ability to split blended polycotton, producing polyester fit for recycling, along with the cellulose powders with a number of potential applications. The decolorization and biological recycling is still at the lab stage, though. The garment-to-garment shop is a miniature of the 3 recycling units with the addition of spinning, doubling and twisting units, and 2 I'm not even going to pronounce that, knitting machines. The capacity for garment-to-garment system is not as high as an industrial scale, but it certainly shows that it's on its way and is something that we probably get too soon. So from these, I think you're seeing there is a lot more new business models, and we need to start looking at how this is invested and where the UK can sit within the world stage. It seems to make sense to me that if you're producing waste in the UK, that you deal with it in the UK. So we should have all the facilities and the infrastructure here rather than re-export it, which is something that we've been a bit guilty of in the past, especially with the reuse market. We've come a long way since Louis XVI set the ball rolling in the 17th century when he demanded that courtiers change their silks annually. The French silk weavers were extremely happy, and from that we now have a fashion industry where the consumer wants things now, not waiting. And as soon as something is in fashion, it's out again. Could the future bring us micro factories on every corner, where you drop off this week's out of fashion garments and pick up next week's in fashion garments? But it won't use new resources, it will use old resources, because the micro factory will also be a recycling plant. There has to be collaboration. I think examples I present show that whether the new business models include building platforms for rental or e-commerce, or whether we look at fibre to fibre, we need to work together to ensure we succeed. Some of these models ask for expensive membership fees or other governments to fund it. But I think if we all work as an industry, we will get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. That was great.
Right.
And very interesting. And I think we'll now move on to our second presenter today, Dr. Pammi Sinha, CText FTI from the University of Leeds. Pammi is an associate professor of fashion management. She trained as a fashion designer, and her research interests are in design and technology approaches to remanufactured fashion design process, post-consumer textile waste management, and heritage crafts. Her current research projects about post-consumer textiles are engagement of the public in textile waste management in the Leeds City region, which means working with the Leeds City Council and Zero Waste Leeds, which is a social enterprise. And secondly, an examination of market development for post-consumer textile products in Sri Lanka, working with a university, a garment manufacturer, social enterprise within the Colombo region of Sri Lanka. Pammi's presentation is called Local Actions Towards a Circular Economy of Fashion. Thanks, Pammi.
And mute myself. Thank you, Vanessa. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. Okay, so are you able to see that? Okay, so I'm just going to get started. So hello everyone, and thank you very much, Vanessa, for that introduction. I'm going to take you very quickly through the project that I've been doing with a focus on the local. The project was funded by the Impact Acceleration Account of the Economic and Social Research Council. Project partners were Zero Waste Leeds, a social enterprise, and the Leeds City Council, to make sure that we had our activities aligned with local policy, the local policies. Zero Waste Leeds was set up in 2018 by a Leeds-based social enterprise called Social Business Brokers, CIC. Their aim was to build a movement to help Leeds become a zero-waste city by 2030. Zero Waste Leeds had a successful project with the LCC, the Leeds City Council, and Hubbub, with a project called Leeds by Example and Recycle on the Go. They organised specially coloured bins for disposing of coffee cups and agree or 3 pledges made by the public on changes that they would make personally. When I first met Zero Waste Leeds, they were interested in addressing the clothing sector, but had few contacts. Leeds City Council also at the time had declared a climate emergency in 2019. Their objectives for 2030 are zero waste and carbon neutral. Their focus on waste has shifted from recycling to reuse and reduce because they have lower carbon impacts. Consumerism was and is a huge issue, and their interest in keeping textiles out of domestic bins was high because of the carbon intensity of production. Because of the importance of the consumer, they identified 3 big challenges: behaviour change, which needs to be driven by the consumers, and the LCC regarded their role as engaging, educating, and encouraging simple changes to support the network to grow. And they regarded these groups as community assets. And so in their way, they were to engage people and the local economy. And in doing so, they would increase the network of exchanges, repair shops, and develop the movement of change. And the third prong was the polluter pays principle, where Leeds City Council are definitely looking at extended producer responsibility and a potential levy on clothing sales that would go back into supporting used clothing collection, sorting and reprocessing. So the potential for the retailer to pay tax on each item sold. I was interested in encouraging the public to separate unwanted textiles from household rubbish and donate appropriately. This is the cornerstone for waste textile reprocessing and is influenced by public policies, businesses, and social practice. So our research plan was twofold: to raise public awareness of textile waste management strategies and engage people in developing and understanding about textile waste management. So the Leeds City Council estimated that in Leeds, something like 4,000 tonnes of textiles potentially go into the household general waste, the black bin. It's unlikely Leeds will set up curbside collections, as they fear it may affect charity donations market, but they will continue to help support the networks as they currently do. Discussions with the LCC identified that Leeds no longer landfills. Anything in the black bin could eventually reach the final destination, which is the ERF, the Energy Recovery Facilities for Waste to Energy Incineration. The LCC wanted to get people to make reuse more visible and see clothing as a resource that should be valued. So they supported some of the UK's first charity shops to be co-located on our recycling centre sites through promoting various repair and clothing exchange networks in Leeds. Zero Waste Leeds established the Leeds School Uniform Exchange, a network of school uniform reuse schemes run by volunteers in local communities across Leeds. Through previous projects looking at post-consumer textiles, I was able to connect Zero Waste Leeds with a local textile recycling company to take collections of uniforms too. So our key message in our project became, don't put your textiles in the black bin. And our project started in January of this year. Our first public meeting was a fashion hack, where we welcomed anyone interested in fashion, in making and saving clothes and textiles from the landfill or the incinerator. We shared our project aims and objectives in the blog that we were creating and the map that we were constructing, which has identified locations of LCC and local charities textile banks within Leeds. The enthusiasm for the map was such that we were asked to include the local repair shops, clothes exchanges, upcyclers and tailors. Within the first 6 months, the map had had over 25,000 views. The blog itself contained 4 areas of learning: reuse, recycle, dispose and incinerate. And in each, there was a brief explanation of what might happen to clothing once it's relinquished. This was also accompanied by academic papers for anyone wanting to dive a bit deeper into those issues. Building on from the blog, Zero Waste Leeds organised with the Leeds City Council a Zero Waste Leeds Fashion Week, which was a series of online events in April. And they had a number of themes, and it included sharing stories of local designers who are designing waste out of their processes and exploring what could be learnt from Leeds' rich clothing and textile heritage to then look forward to creating a more sustainable clothing culture. And building on the work of the project, the public engagement project, Zero Waste Leeds worked with the Royal Society of Arts and the Leeds City Council to develop a project they called Leeds Fashion Futures. And this project explores how to build from the bottom up a local circular economy around fashion, clothing and textiles in Leeds. The Zero Waste Fashion blog is now part of the Facebook website where the project is. It's delivering on another of the Zero Waste Fashion Leeds objectives of developing a peer learning area for makers to upload their videos showing repair and maintenance tips. For this project, we also organised a workshop with the Knowledge Transfer Network group entitled Materials and Manufacturing Challenges in Making Fashion Sustainable. This one-day workshop heard from national and international businesses and academics in the morning about key issues around sustainable fashion, the circular economy, recycling of wool, and supply chain issues for recycled materials for sportswear. The afternoon session was about the local. The objectives were to share experiences, challenges, and find opportunities and synergies. In the afternoon, we had presentations from Zero Waste Leeds, the Leeds Clothing Community Exchange Group, who have a beautiful business model. No money is exchanged whatsoever. The value is purely in the clothing, and it is just about the item, not the brand. For each item of clothing or pair of shoes brought into the exchange, you're given a credit, which allows you to spend that credit on an outfit or another pair of shoes. You can save credits for another time, so you don't have to buy at that place, or you can even donate credits. They keep a database of people that have attended and the credits that they've accrued. And then they also support local charities with donations of appropriately sorted clothes. Another speaker was Julia Roebuck, an upcycler local to the Leeds and Huddersfield area, who talked about her recent Future Fashion Factory Award for Sustainable Fashion Design and her workshops engaging communities of various age groups, helping them think about how to save their clothing. Another participant in the afternoon who'd also talked in the morning was Dr. John Parkinson from Ionio, a company called It's Not Over Until It's Over. And in the morning, he'd presented a really good talk about the history of wool recycling in Yorkshire, leading up to his current company activities. In the afternoon, he presented the key issues for his company. We also had Leeds City Council and Veolia, who manage the black bin waste in Leeds region. And Veolia explained to us the process in terms of how waste is pre-treated before being processed for incineration, so that we understood in a balanced manner what happens to clothing in black bins. from the afternoon session, we got together, we had various groups meeting, and to try and give you an idea as to what came out of the workshop, we thought 4 keywords came out of it: technology, education, policies, and the consumer. And I've tried to list some of the issues that were brought out from the afternoon. There were quite a lot more, but I just thought it would be easier to read this table rather than the whole thing. So these are the things that we thought were most important and possibly something that could be developed upon. So really it was a way of trying to engage people to think about how we could keep the value of our clothing within circulation for longer than it currently is. So that's where I'd like to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pammi. That was great. For those that are interested, the company that Pammi's just mentioned about, whose name I also can't pronounce very well, they have actually just written up their story for the next issue of Textiles. So that will be available for everybody to actually read about. It's quite an interesting story of how one company has sort of gone through the trials and tribulations of a family business and rejuvenated themselves into a new, modern, forward-looking business model. So we haven't actually got any questions coming yet from the audience, so I'm hoping that you're all avidly waiting to ask them. We would appreciate you putting some forwards, but I've got a couple myself. One is that, Ross, I know you've also been involved in a similar project within the London area to what Pammi's just been talking about, but I wonder whether both of you would just like to think about whether you think that these are things that we should be tackling on a local basis, or whether it makes more sense to tackle waste nationally, and whether it should be something that the government is much more focused on instead of having to do local initiatives with local councils. Maybe, Ross, do you want to answer that first from the London project?
Yeah, not a problem. So we obviously, like Pammi's mentioned, a lot of groups, upcycling and swap centres and things like this. And we engage with a lot in London, and we always find if it's a local community, you know, the community gets behind it and it's really, really successful. And you just do get that natural sort of community effort. I think the problem is unless you've got some sort of national clear focus on what can and can't be done and what's best practice, you just end up with different stories in different places. And generally, it's like the whole curbside recycling debate. You know, every area has a different way of doing it. No one really knows what's happened, and the message just gets confused. Whereas I think if you look at Love Food, Hate Waste, I think that's a really good example how that industry got behind it and tried to put forward one clear message. And I think if we can do that and just find a simple middle ground that everyone follows, I think, you know, it's just going to make it easier for everyone. I don't know if Pammi agrees with me.
Yeah, I do actually. I think it's easier to see things happening on a local ground, so it encourages people to stay with it and continue with those activities. And once people feel that they have ownership over issues, then I think people are engaged and enthusiastic. But you're right, I think it needs an overarching sort of strategy, you know, that's more national. And I suppose that's where groups like RAP come in, because they do see the whole national picture, and we have links with the system as opposed to just consumers and local groups. So yeah, definitely national strategic sort of approaches is I think you need both, because if the will isn't there on the ground level, then the strategic work is there, but it needs somebody to action it, I think.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, obviously the part of the SCAP Love Your Clothes campaign has been around trying to convince the consumer to keep textiles out of the black bin waste, and obviously keep things out of the waste stream as much as possible. But yeah, I think it might be a key thing that we do need to look at this as a national campaign on a bigger scale.
Can I just add something as well?
Yeah.
I think what I've found in the past, you'll get a community group set up and you'll have some really well-meaning volunteers and they get it off the ground and they're push. You'll have a big waste company and a council that will help it in some way. So they might provide, a shop for free for a certain amount of time, or they provide the collection. And then over the years, it gets taken for granted. The volunteers, their life moves on, other people haven't come in, or someone at the waste company or the council moves, and then suddenly the funding's gone and all of those years of hard work just disappears. Because I think, rather cynically, people rely on the community to do it, but quite often it's not self-funding, it's done on a voluntary basis, or there's, like Pammi was saying, where you can exchange clothes and you just swap one for the other. That's great, but when somebody then has to say, right, you've now got to make a profit, cover the overheads, pay for the electricity, suddenly it falls down as a model. And I think you need that sort of big either government funding or industry funding, whereby producers do pay to help subsidise this, to make sure that stuff stays into circulation a lot longer than just going into the bin. And at the moment it goes into the bin and the consumer doesn't think it costs them anything, even though it does obviously in their rates and what have you. But they don't look at it. So I think you've just got to make sure that it stands up economically as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. We have now got a couple of questions that have come in. There's one from Frank Moore saying, have you yet done any links with UK store groups? As I believe the John Lewis Group are beginning to start accepting returned clothing after consumer use. And yes, I think certainly within the Recyclatex group, we have links with several retail groups. And I think that the John Lewis scheme is an interesting scheme. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing quite a lot more of that type of scheme pop up over the coming months. I don't know if Ross, if you want to talk about any of the schemes that you see that are out there already.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting business area. There's a lot of companies, you're looking at Fred Up in the United States, and there's a lot setting up in this country, whereby partnering with clothing brands, clothing retailers, and looking at the ways that they can either control the clothing further down its life, looking how they can use that as a mechanism to gain new customers. There's been a lot of talk whether you actually cannibalize your own sales. So if you take something back and then put it onto a reuse platform, whether you're missing out on the original sale, or what we found through a lot of research is actually that, especially the higher end brands, what they're doing is finding a new customer base that perhaps wouldn't be able to afford a full price one. And you're also finding a lot more now that people are willing to pay for secondhand clothes. It's seen as, if it was £100 new, they're willing to pay up to £30 or £40 for something. So I think that's changing, people's mindset on what clothing decisions they make at first. They're beginning to realise if you buy something, that was £5 to £10 when it's brand new, it's not really going to be worth a lot in a couple of years' time or even 6 months' time. And brands are looking at how they can change from this linear system to more of a loop system, and having that ongoing conversation with their customers and using it as a loyalty program, which I think is a really good thing. Anything that gets people engaged in this, and yes, they are using it to get more sales, but it's more sales of something that's been reused rather than a new product. And obviously we all know that reuse is so much better than virgin products. So yeah, I think it's really exciting, and we're going to see loads of new things coming out in the next couple of years, I'm sure.
Pammi, do you want to add anything to that? Or?
No, I think you've covered it in terms of the retailer connections. So yeah, I think it's really exciting actually that we are seeing so many new initiatives coming out.
I think it's one of those things that's vital that we ensure that the whole of the supply chain is involved in this, so that it's not just the retailers, but it's getting the yarn spinners and the actual manufacturers involved as well. And sort of leading on from that, one of the questions I had was, how far do you both feel we are away from fibre to fibre recycling? And we've also had a question that's come in to say, do we have regenerated fibres from waste available in the UK yet? So I don't know who wants to start with that one, or those two.
I'll start if you like. Yes, I think in my presentation I said it's the holy grail, isn't it? And a lot of retailers over the last 6 months have contacted me and are always incredibly disappointed that there's not this machine that you throw clothes in and new clothes come out. But the good news is there is a lot of companies that have made a lot of advances. Renewcell being the obvious one. They've actually scaling up. I think their main plants, new plants opening early next year, and they will be taking post-consumer waste as well as pre-consumer. And I think you're finding that, you know, the investment industries realise that there's a resource there and there is demand. So I think within the next couple of years, you're going to find an awful lot more technology coming out and being able to do this. But to answer the question, unfortunately, we do still seem to be, you know, at lab stage. We're coming out of it and they're scaling up, but you know, anything on a huge industrial scale, it's got to be 5 years away, maybe even 10. So yeah, it's not quite there.
Yeah, I mean, the H&M group and the Lauder group, they both are funders of all sorts of initiatives in terms of innovations in fibre and technology and all of that. And within both, they have startups that are looking at post-consumer textile waste and making fibres from that. But as Ross has said, I mean, there's nothing really that's made it into the mass market at all. I think Warren again actually have said that they reckon there's about 1% fibre that's been recycled, whether it's post-consumer or post-industrial, that's actually in the system. So I think it's still quite a long way away. However, the interest is rising, and I think there is more alarm every year or every month. We hear more and more alarming stories about how much waste there is and all of that. So that surely got to be encouraging to companies to actually look at it seriously and think of how they can import it into their processes.
Do you think that it's something that we should be having recycling plants situated within the UK, or do you think it's inevitable that they're going to be overseas?
I think you know, from all I've seen, I think we should really be looking at trying to develop. If we want to have local manufacture, then we've got to be able to have those technologies and those facilities. And it's hearing the talks from the KTN and you know, people who are actually operating those sort of business operations. So we had that sportswear group talking about the issues that they faced when they were trying to manufacture made in Britain, and they actually couldn't find a factory that could manufacture for them using the recycled fibres in a way that was going to be appropriate for their brand and their message. So I think we've really, you know, as you say, we've really got to look at it in the round in terms of the supply chain and in terms of how we can actually do our production at home. It's yeah, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there's a couple of weeks ago there was a big story came out that there was and I'm not going to mention any company names, but there was an agreement that had been put in place between a charity in the US and a recycler in Scandinavia. And unfortunately, instead of sourcing the stuff locally, they're going to be sourcing from the US. And that just seems to be sort of counterintuitive to me, that you know, it's great, yeah, they've got the agreement in place, but to actually be shipping waste textiles from the US to Scandinavia to produce new textiles just does not seem to make sense when it should be available locally for them. So, okay, well, I don't think we've got any more questions, so we've obviously answered everybody's queries, or we'll get an influx of questions afterwards, but thank you very much, both of you. I think that was quite an interesting chat. And I think Stephanie wants to come back in now and say her goodbyes to us all.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa, for chairing the Institute's first Tea with a TI webinar. And thank you also to the presenters, Ross and Dr. Pammi Sinha. Both organisations are corporate members as well. So we really appreciate your support. And thank you for sharing your information as well with our members. Two insightful and enjoyable presentations, and I'm sure you'll all agree. It gives us all something to think about, both professionally and personally, as well, in terms of sustainability, recycling, reuse. So just a gentle reminder, if you haven't registered for tomorrow's webinar, day 2 of Tea with a TI, please do join us. Members are required to sign up to each day of the series, and you can do this via the TI homepage as well. So tomorrow we have Adrian Wilson from AWOL Media and Textile Institute short course tutor, talking about how and why a humble fabric reached the political agenda, the top of the political agenda in 2020. The inside track on the role of melt-blown non-wovens in the fight against COVID-19. We also have Barbara Shepherd, a Chartered Fellow from Manchester Metropolitan University, talking about the impacts of COVID-19 and the Sustainable Development Goals in the textile chain and in the fashion industry. So another really good list of presenters there. Following this series also, just to mention, we really would welcome feedback on what topics from across our industry members would like to hear about. We're hoping that this series is well received, as it's something that we'd like to continue and provide informative and relevant webinars for our members throughout 2021. So I'd like to wish you all a good evening and a good day, depending on where in the world you are, and hope that you'll be able to join us tomorrow. So thank you for your time.